Hello and welcome back to Sax Wizard. Today we're going to take a closer look at something called the circle of fifths. What is the circle of fifths? How can you use it? And why should you use it? These are some of the questions I'm going to answer today. Let's get into it. What is the circle of fifths? The circle of fifths is essentially a visual representation of different intervals, specifically fourths and fifths. Here's a diagram of the circle of fifths. I'd recommend printing out a physical copy and keeping it somewhere you can see when you practice. If we move clockwise around the circle, we move in fifths. C, G, D, A, E, and so on. For example, G is the fifth note in a C major scale, and D is the fifth note in a G major scale. If we move anti-clockwise around the circle, then things change. When we move anti-clockwise, the interval changes to fourths. C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and so on. This is why some people call it the circle of fourths instead. For example, F is the fourth note in a C major scale, and B flat is the fourth note in an F major scale. The inner circle just shows the relative minor keys. For example, A minor is the relative minor to C major, and E minor is the relative minor to G major. How can we use the circle of fifths? We can use the circle of fifths when practicing anything from scales and arpeggios to licks and approach patterns. It's an incredibly useful and versatile tool. Here's an example of how we might use the circle of fifths in practice. We might decide we want to practice our scales. This could be our major scales, minor scales, bebop scales, different modes, anything. But for this example, let's keep things simple and say that we want to practice our major scales. We can start at any point around the circle. We don't necessarily always have to start at the top of the circle. We can also play around the circle clockwise, anti-clockwise, or even a combination of both. For example, we could play clockwise around the circle starting on C. So we play C major, G major, D major, and so on until we've played all the way around the circle and got back to C. If we want, we can keep playing round and round the circle clockwise for that practice session. We might decide to mix things up and play anti-clockwise around the circle. We play C major, F major, B flat major, and so on until we got back to C again. We might decide to mix things up a bit more and play around the circle once clockwise and then once anti-clockwise and repeat this pattern. There are countless ways that you can use the circle as a practice tool. Your imagination is basically the limit. The circle of fifths can be used to practice arpeggios, chord tones, licks, approach patterns, literally anything. It's not limited to just scale practice. Why is it beneficial to practice using the circle of fifths? There are a number of reasons why it's beneficial to use the circle of fifths when you practice. Firstly, using the circle of fifths forces you to play through all 12 keys and practice every key in equal amounts. This means you become equally comfortable playing in all 12 keys, and you avoid having favourite keys or easy keys that you've over-practiced and hard keys that you've under-practiced. And you see this in beginners who prefer keys like C major and G major to keys with more sharps and flats like F sharp major or D flat major. The earlier you start using the circle of fifths, the less key bias you're going to have and the more comfortable you're going to feel playing in all 12 keys. Secondly, you'll notice that as you change key, moving around the circle in either direction, only one note changes. For example, moving clockwise from C major to G major, the only note that changes is F natural to F sharp. Or moving anti-clockwise from, say, F major to B flat major, again only one note changes. E natural changes to E flat. And this is true for any key, major or minor, moving clockwise or anti-clockwise around the circle. This makes it a very logical way to play through the keys and makes things slightly easier if you're trying to learn a new scale or lick and want to go through all the keys. This is the opposite of moving chromatically through the keys, where virtually every note changes every time you change key. For example, moving chromatically from C major to D flat major, virtually every note changes in the scale. Lastly, it's important to be able to visualize the circle for the purposes of memorizing the different intervals. It's really important to know your fourth and fifth intervals inside out in every key. This stops us having to physically count or play up the scale to work out an interval. It's even more important to train our ears so that we can hear what an interval is. Is it a third, fourth, fifth? And regularly playing around the circle in both directions is great ear training to start to recognize those fourth and fifth intervals. Hopefully this video has provided you with a good introduction to the circle of fifths and how to use it. Personally, I think it's a super useful tool and definitely something that's worth memorizing and integrating into your current practice routine. I hope you enjoyed the video today. As always, thanks so much for watching and see you next time.